Josh is involved with Friends of Doc, and so I think you'll be excited to hear from him about what they're doing with that restoration project. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks. I too, like Sam, we're very blessed to work at Spirit, but I always tell everyone, my friends say, "Oh, that's cool, you work in the aviation industry," and I say, well, it's safe to fly because I don't build them, right? They don't trust me to build them, they just trust me to talk about them. And so the same to be said for the B-29 Doc. I'm here on behalf of dozens of volunteers who spent about 500,000 man hours putting together an airplane over 17 years here in Wichita. So I'll share just a little bit of brief information with you, and then we can have a quick conversation before you all have to get back to doing the good work that you do. So Doc was built in Wichita at the Boeing facility just down the road. That's now Spirit. That plant that he was talking about, Plant 2 at Spirit, is the old Boeing facility that built B-29s. It actually has been retooled several times. All of the H model B-52s that are currently in the fleet the United States military were built in Wichita at that same factory. Jared Bartlett told me that just a few months ago, so I'm using it as a good talking point. I did not know that. So it's a example of how we've just evolved this business over time. And so Wichita built 1,400 and some odd B-29s, and we have Doc as one of them. Built in '44. Delivered in '45 to the U.S. Army Air Corps. Doc did not see World War II action because the war ended. It was being outfitted to be able to carry bombs, and then the war ended. So Doc's role was really I was off by 200. Sorry, 1644. So Doc really was a radar calibration squadron. It was Doc. And there were 9 aircraft, in fact, in New York. So it was Snow White, the Seven Dwarfs, and the Wicked Witch, and Doc was one of the originals. And so it's been a few years towing targets and making sure that they could calibrate targets. And then, like all good old airplanes, they retire to where it's nice and warm and dry, into Arizona or to a desert, into a boneyard. So Doc was sitting on the floor of the Mojave Desert for a few years, 42 to be exact, and a guy by the name of Tony Mazzolini had this love affair with a B-29. He was a B-29 flight engineer in the Korean War, and he said, I'd really like to have one of those. I'd like to have a Harley, but it's not going to work. My wife always says no, so I'm for sure not going to get to own a B-29. But he had this love affair with a B-29, and got word that there were some B-29s sitting at the China Lake Naval Station in California. So he had a conversation with the Navy, and they said, we don't have any B-29s. And so they argued for a few years, and they flew over, and some of his commercial aviation friends were able to take pictures, and he went back and said, those are B-29s. And they again argued, and they finally said, well, those aren't B-29s, those are targets. And he said, okay, potato, just stop shooting at them, please. I'd like to have one. So they had pulled Doc, as you can see over here, off to the side, and they said, well, you can't, typical government red tape, right? You can't buy it from us, but we can trade. All right, so what would you like? And they said, well, we'd like to have a B-25 restored for static display. So Tony says, okay. He goes off to think about this, and he finds a B-25 in South America. He restores it to static condition. I'm sure the Navy thought, we'll just tell him a B-25 and this guy will go away. Nope, he didn't. He came back with a B-25 and knocked on their door and said, okay, here's your B-25. I'd like this B-29 that's in pieces. So it took the team in California a few years to get it pulled out of the desert. They were originally going to fly it out of the desert, much like they did Fifi, the other restored B-29. But they soon realized that could not happen. It had corroded. It was not flyable. So Tony heard of a guy by the name of Jeff Turner. Many of you probably know who Jeff Turner is, and had never met Jeff, but picked up the phone and called. And Jeff's executive assistant at the time took the phone call and the message and walked in and gave Jeff the number in 1999 and said, here, this guy, Tony Mazzolini, called. He wants to talk about a B-29. So Jeff, being the good guy that he is, picked up the phone and called and said, sure, Tony, yeah, if you can get it to Wichita, we'll figure out it'll take probably a couple of years. We'll put this thing back together and help you get it in the air. It arrived in summer of 2000 on 7 flatbed trailers, and over the years, it was put back together by, as I mentioned, dozens, if not hundreds, of volunteers over about 17 years. They were run out of a hangar. They were homeless for a while. I remember my days at KFDI. I would go and we would interview the doc's friend. Well, we would interview the doc folks, and they would be bragging about how they were going to put this airplane back together, and they would give tours inside the old experimental flight hangar at Spirit. And almost before you heard the door shut, you could hear people kind of giggling and laughing about, yeah, you're going to put this back together. I mean, there were pieces everywhere. I mean, I don't know how many of you were able to tour back then and saw that, but it was quite impressive. So fast forward to about 2012, Jeff Turner and some local aviation enthusiasts and business leaders said, okay, how do we get this thing back in the air? What's it going to take? And it obviously is going to take some money and some dedication. So they founded Doc's Friends, a nonprofit group that purchased the airplane and the debt back from Tony and paid all that down and was able to start raising some money to get the airplane back in the air. And finally, in 2015, we rolled it out. We started the engines, got airworthiness in 2016, and then in 2016, we also flew the airplane in July for the first time. We were victorious, although flight only lasted about a minute or two because we had some chip detectors come on in the engines, which are common. Many of you probably had old cars and things like that where they used to say, hey, be easy on this car, don't go over 55 for a while. We break those engines in. Same way with these radial type engines. So I want to talk just a little bit about the volunteers, and then we can talk about some questions. So we were able to get it back in the air. The purpose is there were 3 phases: restore the airplane. Phase 2 was to go operate the airplane as a flying tribute to the men and women who serve our country and who built, designed, and maintained the airplanes. And then 3 is to build a permanent home. And we have completed phase 1 and phase 2, and we're in the middle of phase 3. So this young lady here is Connie Palacios. And Connie, in 1942, went to work for the Boeing company as a 17-year-old graduate from Newton High School. And she today is 94 years old, and she will outrun everyone in the room, I guarantee it. A wonderful lady, and we still use her. She actually riveted the nose section, the 41 section, on every B-29 that went through the Wichita factory, including Doc. And during the restoration project, they only had to replace 6 of her rivets, and she replaced those. She would not let anyone touch them. So there are a lot of ornery elderly gentlemen that are part of the volunteer team, but she puts those gentlemen in their place, let me tell you. So I've had the honor of hanging out with Connie. So we wanted to, again, honor, educate, and connect. And I would be remiss if I didn't stop here for a minute and talk about this gentleman. This is Charles Chauncey, and Charles was a B-29 pilot in World War II. He flew 35 missions. Most guys and gals who are in the military at that time did not fly 35 missions. They flew about a dozen or so. We lost Charles Chauncey a week and a half ago. He was 92 years old, and so we're blessed to have known Chauncey, and this is why we do what we do. It's why we wanted to honor him and men and women just like him who worked on the program. The other thing is we wanted to educate the future generation. You'd be surprised about how many people we talk to over the years who they see WW2 and they say, wait, World War XI? What is that? WWII? I mean, what does that mean, right? So that's very concerning to me, for my children, and I'm sure concerning to you and your children, and for some of you grandchildren. I must also say those 2 redheads are stunning, by the way. Those are my daughters, and when you're in communications, your family gets to be part of photo shoots from time to time. And then we also wanted to connect people with this warbird. We wanted to fly it around the country. We want people to touch it, see it, learn about the STEM technology. I would also be remiss if I didn't quickly mention, Sam talked about 52 airplanes a month coming out, 52 fuselages a month coming out of the Boeing factory in Wichita. And that's great. We're very proud of that. That's a big deal, right? A lot of work goes into it. It's the full tube and all of that. We ship it on rail. Boeing puts the avionics on it, puts the wings and the engines on it, and they fly it. Well, the men and women who built these, most of them women, during the height of the war in 1945, they were pushing 4.5 full B-29s out of the factory a day. 4.5 a day. That's roughly, give or take, somewhere around 90 to 95 airplanes a day. And they would roll across it would come out of the north end of the factory, and they would roll them across Oliver. They would put fuel and oil in the engines, and then they would fly them. They would fly them to other centers in Kansas, Pratt, Great Bend, and the like, to put the guns and the other things on them, but they were flying about 4.5 of them out of here a day. So that lets you understand the difference and what they've done. Now, we needed to build them quickly, inexpensively, because they needed to go deliver the firepower on the front lines. So they only needed to last, most of these B-29s only lasted probably 10, 12, 13 missions. They didn't last very long. A few more than the 737s, right? I mean, the 37s are operating a few more takeoffs and landings than the B-29.
Come, patriots. Come, common man and woman, to the sound of liberty pleading. Come hammer and build, to answer freedom's urgency. Your descendants will celebrate you. They may not fully understand what you did until they try to do it themselves, but given the task, the long, hard work of remembering by rebuilding, they will. Now to remember those who formed the steel and pounded the rivets, and those who flew into the belly of hell. Doc, today, one of 2 remaining B-29 Superfortresses that will ever fly. For years, lying broken, dust-covered, and forgotten in the desert. Doc's friends. Nobody asked you to do it. Nobody would have known better if you hadn't. If Tony Mazzolini hadn't said, "This B-29 is going to fly if I have to pull it out of the desert myself," we wouldn't be here, on the threshold of 60 years. Really, think about it. Practically a whole lifetime, waiting, and now, ready to fly again. In the years since Doc's rescue, as in the urgent days of World War II, the energy of hundreds has again been focused on getting a B-29 into the air. Dozens upon dozens of you, all volunteers, donating your time, your labor, and your treasure to Doc, and to the history of service and sacrifice the aircraft represents. You mechanics, engineers, electricians, and technicians, you who have provided parts, equipment, tools, and service after service. You who worked on parts and pieces of Doc at shops and hangars and their own garages scattered across the Wichita area. You who have toured the nation's air shows, promoting the dream of getting Doc back into the sky. Some of you are descendants of World War II aircraft industry employees. One, a veteran Superfortress pilot. Another, a riveter on Doc, just as you were on the original B-29s at the original Boeing plant. You have mended and welded and wired, researched and repowered, funded, sheltered, pampered, and polished this national treasure, and given a shining new Doc, now straining at his tie-downs, champing at the bit, a shining new mission, to fly into the hearts and minds of the next generations. The task of restoring Doc has been monumental, but your selfless effort is a gift to the world, a glimpse into history beyond value, the view from the cockpit and blister windows of a precious flying tribute to those who build and fly the warbirds of freedom. So, Doc's friends, for your years of faith, patience, and determination, for your heart and your love of country, for keeping words like victory from fading away, for Doc, we salute you.
So we're in phase 3 of the operation, and phase 3 is to build a permanent home for Doc. I'm happy to report we've started that construction out at Eisenhower National Airport. We hope to be in middle of October to the beginning of November. It's a 32,000 square foot facility, and about 24,000 of that is reserved for the airplane alone. Right now we're in temporary quarters at Air Capital Flight Line. We're very thankful to Johnny Stevens and Dave Murfin for working with us and letting us be there. The unfortunate thing is we don't have a permanent landing permit to use that runway there. The government has been very generous to us, but we need to get off that runway so that we can allow public and people to come see us, and that's why the bid at Eisenhower Airport's going through. So, again, $6.5 million project. We have about $5.2 million committed, and we're chasing those commitments now to get that money in the bank. And a lot of people say, how can I get involved? How can I help? There's two things you can do. We need to go raise about another $1 million or so for this hangar. We're doing that through what we call bake sale variety things, through brick sales and through other small donations. So I challenge each of you to go buy a brick, or find someone to buy a brick to help us do that, or just tell the story about aviation, right? It's important to Wichita. It's important to our future to be able to connect our future generations with the greatest generation. The other way you can help is just by coming to see us. We'll have some open houses. We'll have air shows. The budget is based on about $500,000 in operating budget a year. We think that's 8 to 10 air shows globally, not globally, around the nation. And we'll be operating the airplane throughout the rest of the summer. As soon as we get some good weather, we will fly the airplane for the first time in 2018. We are on week 3 of being delayed because of the wind. Anyway, so if any of you are in good with Old Man Winter or Mother Nature, if you can convince them to get along, that would be awesome. So with that, I can take a couple of questions. I know we're bumping up against time to be finished, but thanks for allowing me to be here today, and a couple of questions.
I'm curious how you qualify people to fly a 4-engine propeller-driven aircraft in the current environment. There aren't a lot of them around these days.
No. So the question, that's a great question. We get it everywhere we go. There are 8 left seat certified pilots for a B-29 type in the world, and there are 2 B-29s that are flying, and so we share those pilots. We are working on adding more people to that list. There are about, in addition to the 8, of course, if you're left seat certified, you're right seat certified. In addition to those 8, we have about another 8, 9, 10 individuals that were in the right seat that we're trying to work to move over to the left seat. It's a crew of 6, by the way. Pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer. It's a flight engineer's airplane. The flight engineer operates all the throttles and the power and the control, and then we have 3 scanners that sit in the back. So we're hoping to have a Wichita crew. There's a couple of guys here in Wichita. Ken Newell, who is a retired Cessna aircraft mechanic. He is our certified flight engineer. We're working him in the right seat now to move him over to the left. And then there's another gentleman by the name of Tim Wiebe. He is... His family's been in aviation forever, and so he is right seat certified, and we're working to move him over to the left seat as well.
Right here.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you very much for telling us about the progress on Doc, and thank you for being here. My question is, if you could talk a little bit more about the final, the facility where Doc is going to be placed at Eisenhower Airport. Is that going to be accessible if we bring in visitors from out of state? Can we go there and is it going to be like accessible, every day of the week, and go there and bring the public to it?
Sure. It is a public hangar. It will be open to the public. We're not sure what the hours are, if it's Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, or we're not there yet. But yes, it'll be open to the public. That's the reason we wanted to be at the airport. I mean, it's an opportunity for people of all ages to come see the facility. The other thing I might mention too is, I said it's about $500,000 operating budget a year for the airplane. It costs about $3,000 a flight hour in fuel alone. It takes 100 low lead, and it's about $5.70 a gallon. We burn about 450 gallons of flight hour, so you do the math there. So that's part of the cost. But we think by going to air shows, we want the airplane to sustain itself. And so while we're going to go spend on 8 to 10 air shows about $500,000 to operate, we see about $600,000 a year coming back in. So the difference there is about $100,000. So we really think that the business plan that we've set up will allow us to operate the airplane, and it'll be self-sustaining, so that we're not a constant drain on looking for money from Sedgwick County leaders or Wichita leaders or others. I mean, we'll do that through private donations and things like that when we're on the road. But really the business plan is to let it maintain itself, to pay our own way, to cover utility expenses for this new airplane. We think there'll be some type of a admission fee to the hangar, minimal, I think. We also want to make sure that we're opening it up to school children. We envision buses coming We've got areas in the hangar that we can tell the story, so we can adjust the story about the B-29 or World War II, depending upon the age of the group that's coming in. And so we think we want to be part of that. When kids go to the zoo every year, or when kids go to the exploration place, we want to be part of that whole scenario to where we can allow those students to come in. So that's the goal.
I want to mention, I was one of the first workers on the dock program, still in my badge. I wasn't able to continue, but I'm real proud of my service on that.
Well, thank you.
Also, let me say further that I'm sure I'm one of the very few people in Wichita that was a B-29 flight crew member. I was the 8th Air Force right after the end of World War II, and I probably have about 350 hours of time in B-29. We had one in the headquarters unit. We flew all over the world, and I made most of the trips in it. Europe, Hawaii, South Pacific, everywhere. And just fantastic career. The only trip I didn't make was our plane went to the atomic test and we talked, and I didn't go with that one. I was always proud of it. The guys went on it, had stories of it at 40,000 feet, flying, viewing the atomic bomb with those cobalt blue, cobalt glass. And I was glad after I found out what all this about. I was glad I didn't think about it. At that time, I was really dejected because I didn't get to go on that trip. But anyway, it's a fantastic plane. I love it, and I'm just very fortunate to have been a part of it.
Well, thank you for your service. I think we probably have time for just a couple more questions. And if I'm running over, go ahead. If you need to take off. Okay.
Right here.
This is a restored plane, so obviously, but it's still very, very old. Can this airplane land with 2 of those 4 engines? And obviously, on takeoff sometimes, you're heavy with fuel, and if they have to turn around and land, does that have a fuel dump capability?
You know, I've learned from days in communications, when you don't know the answer, it's okay to say, I don't know. The fuel dump capability, I don't know. The engine capability, I do know. Yes, we could land with 2 of the 4 engines. In fact, I've been told we could land with 1. We could operate the airplane with 1. We're not that heavy, so we wouldn't obviously be able to go very far, but we would be able to save the airplane. The other thing I might mention there, though, too, we, all of us, my wife does not like to fly, so she doesn't like this story, but, and she gets really nervous when I fly on the B-29. But it's essentially a brand new airplane, and what I tell her is, and I'll tell all of you, we have all been on an airplane that has had something wrong with it. The airplane sitting out here at Mid-Continent or at Eisenhower National, there's probably something wrong. It's not a safety of flight issue. It might be that one of the tray tables doesn't lock into place. It might be that the pilot's headset has got some fuzz in it. It could be something very, very minor. And obviously they don't fly if it's a safety of flight matter, but they will probably fly that airplane back to Chicago or to Dallas to work on it. We don't do that with the B-29. If there's an issue, even if we could get somewhere, we'll stay on the ground. And we proved that point last year. We were on our way to Oshkosh, and we stopped for we call them kind of a hi, how are you event. If we can stop over and do a little tour, we do. And we stopped at Rockwell Collins and Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And on the way up, we had an engine cowling issue. It wasn't a problem. It was just one of the vents wouldn't close quite right. It was, you could feel a little shimmy in the controls. Could have made it to Oshkosh, not a problem. But we had the part on a trailer and truck that was going to meet us in Cedar Rapids. So we just spent another couple of hours on the ground the next day in Cedar Rapids and fixed it right there on the ground. We could have gone on to Oshkosh. It would have been no problem. Would have been no hurt to the airplane. But we've committed to make sure that we don't ever damage the airplane or risk it. In fact, could we have flown yesterday? Probably. It was windy. It's on the upper limits. There's no need to risk it. So.
Right here. Next question.
Yep.
Yes, I was stationed over in Milton, England, and had a chance to work on a B-29. I was a recip mechanic, and I remember the oil leak that they had, and it was on the way to the museum over in England, and so that was a proud moment of mine. And I also had a chance to volunteer at Boeing here, but I don't remember if I swept the floor or what, but I did something over in that hangar. But thank you. thank you for all the good information.
He mentioned oil leaks. Well, thank you. He mentioned oil leaks. If we leave a lot of dock DNA on the ramp wherever we go, in these engines, if it's not leaking oil, you've got a problem because you probably don't have any oil in the engine, so you better check those out. We've got about 60 gallons of oil on each engine, by the way, and we burn, I don't know, a gallon or so an hour. Is how that works. So that goes into the cost, right? That's all part of the cost. Our fuel bill alone, what we estimate in 2018 is about $160,000 is the fuel bill alone for the air shows and the operations that we're going to go do. How do you make that back? Well, we do it in appearance fees. We do not raise money. As Jeff Turner would say, we do not raise money to go to air shows. We go to air shows to raise money. So we do not move the airplane if we're going to lose money. We pass that cost off to those air shows. That's part of our business plan to make sure that we can allow ourselves money in the budget to maintain the airplane, to do the things that we need to do to keep the airplane in running fashion, and also to honor the men and women of our nation. So,
Josh Wells and Sam Sackett.
thank you all.
Give them a big thank you.